The fact that I take as a vocational study um, the professorial elocution of a 12-year-old girl in Gaza could seem to scandalize someone who manufactures the idea of me as a man of malefic intentions because of the cruel story that was concocted around me as a hostage child. It's barbaric that someone would think I mean harm to the children of Gaza in light of what's been done to them, particularly. Obviously, that sets the lowest bar on earth. What I propose to discuss is Mackenzie Shirilla in light of what we've seen and learned about the circumstances in which Strongville asserted its agency over her. She nearly died, and two older men who appear to have been plying her with drugs did die after she was subject to neurohypnosis by the nearby establishment in Pittsburgh, who crashed the train in East Palestine, Ohio, indicating a vinyl solution was in play. Shirilla articulated the threads of evidence that are found in the Strongsville newspaper of that time, which was a recurrence of a ploy in neuropsychiatry that had been implemented when I was a hostage child as well. Cleverly dosaged hallucinogen of terrible cruelty that made the mind seem like it was the source of a person's survival. Mackenzie Shirilla had a seizure at the wheel, a neurohypnotic seizure. But as importantly, there was peer involvement, and she was subject to abandonment by those peers who were not involved, a phenomenon I know well. The motive was probably to get me to identify with her, which I do, so they could say, aha, you too are guilty of a neurological homicide, because they're playing fast and loose with the idea that was articulated by Frank Herbert. Guilt is the iron hammer that belabors the dead. When they put Benjamin Spock with Martin Luther King on a presidential ticket in 1968, they were impugning his libertinage. It was the Playboy era. That is highly illogical, was the subtext of the index system surrounding him, to justify themselves by licensing his assassination as no better and no worse than the crime of fetal stage induced miscarriage. These people are not humane people. They don't care in the least about abortion. They just want the iron hammer of guilt in place so they can operate behind it as though from a shield of conviction. Peers should not abandon each other, nor should populations be left to fend for themselves alone against gobblers on high, maneuvering to create militias who will do them a favor by mass murder. The children of Gaza have been forced to take care of one another. This is an old story in victims of tyranny. In Nicaragua, when the children were herded into a safe zone, the deaf children didn't have teachers. They invented their own sign language. Children looking after children is a daily ordeal in Gaza. Of course, children will be children, and some of them are cruel, and some of them ostracize those other than themselves. The fear of not being able to mingle properly dogs a society where disease has been created as a weapon of discourse for the gobblers on high to prevail in ruining mankind by subjecting us to the idea that we don't have the social tools and the intelligence, the wherewithal, the dignity, the powers of persuasion, and the resources to manage a sustainable development society. And that simply is not true. What we have instead is a tax and spend, waste and fraud system by maniacal mercenaries in the celebrity superstate manipulating everyone so that they can be free of taxes while hoarding corporate profits without redistribution downward on behalf of the society that allowed them to prey on us. By a casino mentality, a belief that we too can be a winner, and when we are a winner, we want laws that say hands off. To combat this success, the schemers have cunningly created a countervailing system that says we will poach and take anything we want. There's no taxation limitations over their confiscation. There's just the usual mania of people who have the power, so they steal. And what we lack is a framework for both protecting and educating and redistributing and taxing properly for sustainable development. Since I cannot do this alone, all I can do is say I appeal to my peers to look carefully at the case of Mackenzie Shirilla and not to abandon her. It was carefully timed and the situation was deployed. There are hints and surroundings that indicate this fact, but most importantly, it's the testimony from her own mind about the neurological agent she was secretly given that led to the hypnotic seizure. It wasn't a homicide. It was a car bombing. And anybody with any integrity would rise to the occasion to recognize that fact. I'm not in corrections, I'm not in psychology, and I'm not in psychiatry. But I recognize the patterns. Pattern recognition is an important feature of education. We must learn how to teach pattern recognition without creating situations of such rivalry and chaos that people are encouraged to lie and to cheat and to steal to get ahead. This mustn't be allowed to happen. What I'm doing with my work is reviewing the history that is embarrassingly obvious in the symbolic tapestry of international cinema, tracing back to the creation of the studio systems by people who had in mind using media to control the world. The way that they can help people not be abandoning towards one another. It's simple enough. We can learn to recognize the dignity that comes with the integrity of consciousness involved in some true understanding. The spiritual dimension of having the power, the spiritual limitations of people who are young, even elderly, have to be recognized. We don't need this cloak and dagger show from the parochial assassins of the military-industrial complex, subverting our educational system because they think that we have purposefully left out the most important issues. If anybody is exploiting the absence of integrity in our educational system, it is them. I don't want to create an us versus them scenario, but when you're singularly objectified as an adversary by a person who is circling you with intent to force you to lie, you're in a pretty hard place. The military had a saying when they took me out of school before inducting me into service as a child slave. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. That is a quip that encapsulates the non-aggression treaty between dictators. Temporary and convenient, it squeezes those in the margins out of the disposition for conquest. Conquest is not self-defense. We have been building a civilization through international law and the United Nations and the Sustainable Development Goals, the Kennedy administration, Martin Luther King's exceptionalism, that reaches people, because we too are reached by the message from the world around us. The message from the world around us is increasingly getting to be a distress call. We need to temper our society's control switchboard so they don't think that they have conquered us on the level of getting us to disobey our basic beliefs that we are a good society, capable of self-government, welfare, social services, and diversification based on competence, generosity, and appeal to those less fortunate to share our goals of a meaningful livelihood for everybody. I, for one, miss Gaza as it was. We've seen an enormity there. But we haven't seen the abolition of human dignity.